Perfect.
Hey, what's up you guys? TechChucker here, and welcome back to the channel. Today we've got a project to work on. It's not a diorama project, it's not an action figure project, it's an organization project. I have been storing all of my paints in a drawer in this desk back here. It's gotten the job done, but boy, it really sucks. It's not organized, it's cumbersome. Got a little bin, I throw everything in there, and I just forget about it. As long as I can get the drawer closed, such is life, I move on. But I think it's time that we move into something a little bit better. I finally designed what I think is going to be the best solution for this. And that's what we're gonna build today. I'm gonna leave a link in the description so you guys can download the plans as well if this is something that you're interested in. Hopefully it'll turn out and I'll be able to get this drawer back so I can use it for something else, like more action figures. Let's get to it, shall we? Before we get started building, we gotta know what we actually want this thing to do. I need it to fit all my paints. 2, I need it to have room to expand. 3, out of the way. 4, what else do I need it? I want it to have slide in and out capabilities. Not ugly.
P.S. No dog.
It's kind of important. What else do I want it to do? I want to be able to see what I have. And then I think number 7 is gonna be easy, gotta spell right, easy access, in and out. Oh, you know what, number 8, cheap. Let's get to the workshop, see what we can do. I did this in Tinkercad. It's a free 3D modeling program that you can use. It's browser based. It works very well for 3D print designs and fairly simple geometric shapes. We've got a 3.5 inch by 3/4 inch birch boards that are gonna be the sides and then the bottom piece. For the back and the shelves, I'm using 1/4 inch birch plywood. And then these front pieces, which look like they're clear, they are clear. The hope is to use a very thin plexiglass that I found in a dumpster ages ago. The plans that you will be able to download will have all the dimensions that I'm using, so I'm not gonna get too far into that. But basically, this is the design. It's pretty simple, nothing too spectacular. I do have some plans down here. You can see where I have some dado joints that I'm gonna do. And then I'm also going to cut a slot for my shelves right down here. Now, the main thing that I'm not certain how it's going to turn out just yet is my shelves. These two, because they're fairly thin, are they gonna bow? What I may have to do is put a little support down at the bottom. That may be the only real adjustment that I think I'm gonna have to make. So hopefully this will turn out exactly the way that I have planned. Let's jump to it, head to the garage, get the table saw out, and make some sawdust. To start off, we're gonna get our materials, measure them up, get them cut, and get out of here. You can use any materials you want. I happen to have some popple wood laying around. It was just a 3/4 inch thick wood, and I'm gonna cut that to size. If you don't have this kind of wood available to you, just use scraps that you've got laying around. Try and get the same thickness, that way then it's about as sturdy as what I've got. But if you don't have it, use whatever you've got. I'm also using a 1/4 inch thick plywood. It's birch for the backer and the shelf. But again, whatever you've got laying around, you use that. Make adjustments to the plans as you see fit. I'm gonna get mine cut up. I've got a chop saw. If you don't have a chop saw, you can certainly use a hand saw. You're gonna wanna use a cross-cut saw though, instead of a ripping saw, because you're going against the grain. That'll give you the cleanest cut. Now we're going to cut a groove out of the back of our side pieces and bottom piece. This is completely optional. You don't have to do it, but I like the clean look of having the backer board in that little groove so it is flush with the back piece. It just looks so nice. Plus, it also helps to keep it much more stable and stronger. That's why I'm doing it. If you don't have a table saw or you just don't have the desire to do it, that's fine. I'm using my table saw. I'm going to cut the groove that it is going to be about 1/4 inch deep, the thickness of my backer board. If your backer board's thicker, you're gonna have to cut a little bit deeper. And it's about a 3/8 inch cut all the way around. When you're doing this, be very careful about where your fingers are. Here's a good reason why you don't get your fingers in the table saw. Because that is what it'll do to a pencil that just barely gets in it. Stay safe out there and wear eye protection. We're ready to cut a dado out of the side pieces for the joint where the bottom piece is going to attach to both sides. Now, I'm not a woodworker by any means because I don't have the actual dado blade. I'm just gonna cut out as much material as possible by adjusting and readjusting the table saw, so that way then I can cut out the same width as my board so I can connect those together. And then I'm gonna do basically the same thing by cutting out a groove for all of my shelves. I've got this designed so that I can put all 3 different paint sizes and they'll just fit perfectly. I can get them in, I can get them out. So I've got to put in grooves for 2 shelves. And I really wanted to get this very tight so that way then the 1/4 inch plywood will just barely slide in, but it'll hold nice and tight. And I did that pretty well. I didn't quite have enough of the 1/4 inch birch plywood. So instead I had to grab a piece of MDF. I'll probably replace that later on with an actual piece of birch plywood, but I didn't feel like buying it. I didn't feel like running off to Menards to get another chunk, so I just threw this in. You gotta work with what you've got. One of my goals was I wanted this cheap, so I wanted to use as much wood as I already had in the shop. Something to consider as you are cutting your grooves, cut so that it is much narrower than what you actually need, and then gradually work your way up. That way then you can get that very nice tight fit without accidentally screwing up and cutting too much. You can always cut multiple times to get the width you want. You can't add the material back. If you are using a table saw and you are doing these longer cuts, you want to use some sort of a sled. Now, I haven't yet made a table saw sled that I can use for those kind of cross cuts, but I am using the little table saw T thing. That helps to keep it in a straight line, and it also helps to ensure that I'm pushing it through nice and smooth and it's not going to get bound and kick back at me. Now, I should be using the guard that comes with this.
Well, is it safe?
Sure, that's what the armor's for. Come on!
I found that with my particular table saw, it's kind of old. More often than not, it will leave a kind of a cut groove or whatever, because there's a little hook-like thing on the back of it to keep it from kicking back. And I just don't like that it does that. So I'm taking a bit of a risk. I wouldn't recommend taking guards off when you're using a table saw. Just again, safety first, be very careful and cognizant of what you're doing. Don't be in a hurry, take your time, get it done right. For the side pieces, you want them to be as identical as possible. That way then you've got your left and your right. Mark them so that you can keep track. Which one is your left one? Which one is the right one? Mark what is front. Some people are much better woodworkers than I am, and they don't need to mark everything. They just keep it in their head.
It's so simple.
I needed to mark it, and I think that you should too. Now that I've got everything all cut up, I'm gonna go ahead and dry fit these together just to see if they actually are fitting right. Then once I'm satisfied with that, I'm gonna hit them with the sander. Because these are gonna be going together and there's gonna be lots of different corners and what have you, sanding it now before I assemble it is gonna make it that much easier to be able to paint it and get a nice finish on it. So don't skimp on this particular step. Sand it before you get started. Popple wood is really nice for this. Is one, it's very cheap, and two, it sands very, very smoothly and can paint very nicely. Framed a mirror, and I had a bunch of extra just laying around. So it's a good furniture wood to use because it's inexpensive and it paints well. Now I don't know how it takes stain. I don't have any intention of staining it. I'm painting this when I'm done, but I want to sand it smooth. So basically you can start with a 120 grit sand, and then I just went down to a 220. That's about as smooth as I needed it. You could go as smooth as you want, but again, I don't need a glass surface look to it. I just needed it smooth. Be careful with the plywood pieces. The layers on that plywood are very thin, and you don't want to start sanding down to take an entire layer off because you don't know what kind of layers are underneath. Normally I'd like to use some glue, but I didn't have any glue. I'm just gonna nail this together and hope that it stays together. We're gonna start the assembly by attaching these side pieces to the bottom piece. And to do that, I'm gonna use some wood screws using some pilot holes. And because I don't have a special bit that's going to make these screws sit flush, I just used a larger bit that fits the head of my screw and just kind of drilled in a little bit very carefully so that those screw heads will fit nicely in there and be flush with the surface of the wood. And then I'm just using this air nailer. If you don't have an air nailer, just get some little, hanging nails or something like that. I like using the air nailer because it has kind of like a little brad type nail. It holds it much better, but again, it's more equipment. If you don't have the equipment, as long as you've got a hammer and some nails, you'll be fine. You might be able to get away with just gluing it together too. If you clamp it together, get it glued nicely, it might stick together, but having a few nails just to hold it in place is probably going to be a good idea. These shelves are essentially floating. I'm not even gluing them in. They're just being slid in. They're not holding anything. They're nothing to do with the structure of the piece. And here we go. We've got it all put together, assembled. It's basically ready for paint. Before I do paint, I want to get the drawer rails put on so that I know where it needs to be. This is the kind of hokey part of this project. Because I'm just using a 1/4 inch plywood, there's not a lot to screw this into. Now my particular rails have very, very short screws, but they do go further in than a 1/4 inch. So this is where the plans don't really address the rails. You may want to beef up the back so that way then when you're attaching your rails, especially on the top portion, that can screw into something. So you might want to put a strip of another piece of 1/4 inch plywood across where that is going to be mounted. I just took some small chunks and threw it on there, called it good. It works for me, but if you want it to be a little bit more professional looking, do whatever you want to add a little bit more material. You could even go with a thicker plywood. If you didn't want to go with 1/4 inch, you could go with 1/2 inch, 3/8, whatever. I wanted to put the rails on first before I paint just to make sure that I know exactly where I want it to go. So that way then after I've painted, I can just find the holes, screw it back in, and I'm less likely to scratch the paint after I've painted it. Now that I've got those mounted, let's go ahead and pull them off and throw some paint on. The paint I'm using is just a standard Rust-Oleum white kind of paint prime paint. It's pretty inexpensive, about $4 or $5. I don't need this to be super awesome looking. I just want it to match the existing cabinet that I already have, which is kind of a white anyway. So white works for me. Pick whatever color you want, or you could just leave it without any paint. But before you do paint, I do recommend that you brush off. I'm using my air compressor to blow off any dust, sawdust that's been sitting on there. And then we're just gonna throw on a couple of coats of paint. I think I put about 2 or 3 coats on, and you can see I've got a drop cloth down. It's an old tarp that I found somewhere, it blew into our yard. Probably better off to do it outside. We just happen to have so much wind that I wouldn't be able to control exactly where the paint is going, and half the time it wouldn't hit the project. Once you've got your first coat on, make sure that you let it sit and dry at least 3 to 4 hours before you put another coat on. It's going to be tacky potentially depending on what kind of paint you use, so try not to handle it too much. I am going to let this sit and dry for at least 24 hours before I really start handling this thing and doing anything with it. All right, now that my paint is dry, here's what we're going to do. we are going to mount the other rails for the drawer aspect of this onto my shelf. I don't have any good instructions as to how to do this. I put the rails back onto the shelf that we made, and then I just measured how far it is from the screw holes from the top one to the bottom one. And then I took that measurement and I put that onto the shelf down below. And I did my best to get it as even and level as possible, but you might have a better way of installing a drawer. This just happened to work. It worked great for me. And this thing is sliding in and out perfectly. The last thing that we need to do is to put our little pieces on that are going to hold our paints in place. Several years ago when I was working on site at my job, there was some dumpsters that they have right out in the hallway where a lot of the times construction folks and whatnot are putting stuff in there. And someone threw in a whole bunch of acrylic clear sheets that I just had to have. I knew exactly what I could be using it for. I use it for windows, for my dioramas, and now I'm using it for strips that will hold my paints in and meet the goal that I had of being able to see what actually happens to be in my drawers so I can see every single thing, all the paints, and it is amazing. The only thing I don't like about it, these pieces of glass are about 1 to 2/16 of an inch thick. It's not very thick. It's just a couple millimeters. So it's fairly flimsy. So I just got to be careful that I'm not being overly rough when I'm pulling stuff out, putting stuff back in. But I love the fact that I can see what's in there, top to bottom. You might not have access to this, or you may not want to go buy it because I'll be honest, clear acrylic plastic is kind of expensive to buy. So if you just need to put in a strip of some more of that 1/4 inch plywood, by all means use that. You could do metal rods, you could do all sorts of different things. Find whatever material works for you. It just happened to be, I had some screws from some piece of furniture that we got. I never throw those extra little screws away, and I recommend that you hang on to it as well. I get that it starts collecting up and you have too much of that junk just laying around, but at some point those things are gonna come to help. And this happened to work out really good. They look nice, they're kind of a goldish look. They screwed in really good. I did some pilot holes both in the plastic first and then into the board, and then screwed my screws in, and it holds perfectly, and I couldn't be happier. All right, there you have it, folks. My custom paint shelf. I hope that you guys found this useful. If you did, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, the bell notification. I'd love to know if you are going to build this design or something close to it. What have you done? Maybe you organize your paints in a different way. I'd love to see what you're doing to keep track of all of your paints. This is working so perfectly. I've had it up for a couple of weeks now, and I love it. I love the slide action, the fact that I can pull this out and see at a quick glance every paint that I want. I can fit even more in here. I've got some of my glues in there. I've got my Mod Podge. I've got some other little materials. My little paint cups fit in here. I've got all my paint brushes. What I might do is buy a little basket that I can put my paint brushes in so that that can sit in something very enclosed, but I can still get in there and get everything. It is absolutely such a nice thing to have, and now I have another drawer that is open for me to put more junk and crap in that I just want to get off of my desk, and it's so cool. So let me know if you're gonna try this particular project, or if you're gonna do something different. If you happen to update the plan that I did, let me know. Hit me up on DMs, be it on Instagram or on Facebook, on my Facebook page. I wanna see what you guys are doing to organize your paints, get them out of the way. That way then your life will be a little bit more organized, and it might make making dioramas that much more fun. So there you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, hit the like button, subscribe button, all that stuff. And I will see you in the next video. Have a good one, everybody.